In the file that I've got open here, everything is inside a div that has the ID content. There's a 20 pixel semi-transparent border around the div, and the image is a background image. Let me close the style sheet for a moment and turn on live view. By default, browsers position background images at the top left of an element inside any border, as shown here. To move the background image to a different position, you use the background position property. But calculating the position is always done from this top left corner, inside the border. CSS3 introduces a new property called background origin, which allows you to redefine the background positioning area. The best way to describe how it works is to show you. I'll just turn off live view and go back into the style sheet and add background origin. Dreamweaver brings up code hints for the values border box, content box and padding box. Let's try border box. The background origin property is supported by the latest versions of all browsers, but Firefox 3.6 has used a slightly different syntax. So to keep Firefox 3.6 happy, I need to put in a different version with the vendor-specific prefix. Vendor-specific prefixes must always go before the standard property, so the correct version takes precedence in browsers that support it. So it's -mos, and it's background origin. And you'll see the reason for using the code hints here. Firefox 3.6 uses border rather than border box. Right, let's just test that out in live view. You see that what has happened now is that the background image is painted underneath the border. So you can see the background image through the translucent border. If I temporarily disable my background repeat, no repeat property, you'll see that the background image tiles and it covers the entire area and it goes underneath the border. Now that's quite normal for it to go underneath the border. Backgrounds always stretch underneath the border. The difference is that the position from which the image starts is now at the edge of the border rather than inside the border. You'll see the implication of this a little later in the video. Let's re-enable that and go back into the style sheet and try one of the different values for background origin. Content box, and for the vendor specific property it is content. Here the background image begins inside the padding at the point where the content begins, but as you can see it stretches beyond the padding on the right hand side. So if you want a background image just behind an element's content, you need to choose an image of the appropriate size. Again, let's see what happens when I turn off background repeat, no repeat. What's happened is that the image has tiled and it now covers the whole background to the div. Background repeat tiles background images horizontally and vertically in both directions, from the point specified either by background position or background origin. And what's happened here is that the top left of the background image is here inside the padding, and that's the starting point, but it still tiles up and down across the whole background of the div. Let's re-enable that rule. Go back into the style sheet and we'll now try the final value, which is padding box. And for the vendor specific property it needs to be padding. So as you can see, padding box merely replicates the browser's normal behavior. Let's disable background repeat, no repeat again. As I mentioned earlier, backgrounds always stretch under the border. Because background origin is set to padding box, the background image's top left corner is inside the border, and it tiles or repeats from that position. With opaque borders this doesn't matter, but if you want translucent borders, background origin plays an important role, and you probably want to set it to border box. Since padding box merely replicates the browser's normal behavior, there's really no need to use it. But using background origin with border box or content box offers a quick and easy way to position background images without the need to calculate horizontal and vertical offsets for background position. In CSS 2.1 you can apply only one background image to an element, so it's become common practice to wrap elements in divs solely for the purpose of adding extra background images. It's a nuisance and wasteful markup, so CSS3 lets you add as many background images to an element as you want. The content div of this page already has a background image at the bottom, but I'd like to add another here at the top right. Doing so is very simple. You just add the details of subsequent images as a comma-separated list. So let's go to the style sheet, and you can see that I've already got the background image, background repeat, and background position properties defined. So to add another image, I just place my cursor, the insertion point, just before the semicolon at the end of background image, and insert a comma. And Dreamweaver automatically brings up code hints. It gives me the URL browser, so I'll click that and select my Grand Canyon tree JPEG image from my images folder and click OK. Now the problem is that I've got two URLs in the background image, so I also need to have two values for the other two properties. So for background repeat, I also don't want this one to repeat, so no repeat. And as you can see, Dreamweaver is bringing up the code hints for me. And I want the background position of this particular image to be at the top right. Now we always say top right, but for CSS it needs to be horizontal first, so it's right, top. And if I just go to design view and switch on live view, you can see that I've got two images there. Now you can immediately see two problems. One of them, of course, is that the text is going across the image, but that's easily fixed with a little bit of padding. The other one is that there's a very strong line here. The reason for that is that the way that multiple background images are inserted is that if they overlap, the first one appears on top and each subsequent one is layered behind. So what's happened here is that my new image has been put behind the original one. Now I can either change the order around, but I think that the first thing that I'm going to do is to see what happens if I change the padding on the first paragraph. So let's create an adjacent sibling combinator, h1 plus p, and we'll give that padding right 290 pixels. Yes, that's quite nicely fixed the problem that I had there. But if you do have a problem with images overlapping, remember that it's the first one that goes on top and each subsequent one is painted behind. Although the padding has fixed that problem, you might be wondering what happens with old versions of Internet Explorer, Internet Explorer 6, 7 and 8. Well, the answer is sadly that they won't display either of these background images. But all is not lost. You can in fact get them to display one of the background images. And the way in which you do that is to have two definitions. Both of the definitions must use the background shorthand property. So what I need to do first is just copy that first background image there and then delete the second image from that property, and I need to convert it into the background shorthand property. So it's going to be background, then the URL for the Grand Canyon, and I want it to be no repeat, and that needs to be center bottom. Then I need to convert the second definition also into shorthand. So it's going to be the Grand Canyon. I want that to be no repeat. I have to add that there before the comma, and the tree one is also no repeat. That goes with that URL. And then I need to move the background position. So for the first one, the background position goes there, and the background position for the second one goes there. Just get rid of those and save it. Now, fingers crossed. Now you can see that I've got the original background of the page showing through there, so we just need to have one more little thing to fix it. I need to add in the background color and make that white. There we are. You can see that it's still working in live view. So that means that it will work in a WebKit browser and in fact any other modern browser. But what about Internet Explorer 6? Let's have a look. Here it is in Internet Explorer 6. You can see that the first background image, the one of the Grand Canyon at the bottom, is displayed, but the second background image of the tree at the top right is not displayed, and it will look the same in Internet Explorer 7 and Internet Explorer 8. The only thing for those two browsers that you will need to do, because 7 and 8 recognize the adjacent sibling combinator, you'll need to use an Internet Explorer conditional comment to create a different rule for the padding for that first paragraph, to prevent it from being pushed over to the left. So you can keep even older versions of Internet Explorer happy with multiple background images. Visitors using one of those browsers see only the first image. Everyone else sees the multiple images. In this video, I'm going to show you how the background size property lets you scale background images. The background image in the body of this page is 1800 pixels wide and 1230 pixels high. Its background position has been set to center top. At the moment, it doesn't use the background size property, so the image is displayed at its normal dimensions. How much you see depends on the size of the browser window, so let's have a look at it quickly in a browser. The center of the background image remains fixed, and you see more or less of each side depending on whether I expand or reduce the size of the browser. Let's go back to Dreamweaver. The background size property can take a value in pixels or a percentage. So let's start with that. This image is 1800 pixels wide, so I'll give it a background size of 450 pixels, which is 1/4 of the size. And let's just see what that does in live view. What has happened is that the image is now 1/4 of its original width, but the height remains the same. As a result, the image's aspect ratio is not maintained. In other words, its proportions are distorted. To maintain the aspect ratio, you need to specify a value for the height as well. So let's just do that. 308 pixels. And you'll see now that the aspect ratio has been maintained. So if you want to use a fixed size either in pixels or in percentages, you need to specify the width first, followed by the height. The latest versions of all browsers support background size, but to keep Firefox 3.6 happy, you need to also use the Moz vendor-specific prefix. So I'll just copy that and add Moz there. -Moz. So that'll keep Firefox 3.6 happy. If you know the size of the element that takes the background image, using the actual dimensions is fine, but often you don't know what the size will be. For these cases, the background size property provides two keywords, contain and cover, which are designed to preserve the image's aspect ratio automatically and scale it to fit the element. Contain scales the image to the largest size to fit both its width and height into the background. Now that sounds simple enough, but look what happens if I use it on this page. The image has hardly changed in size. In fact, it shrunk a little bit. That's because this page contains only this div with a small amount of text in it, so the page doesn't actually have very much height. So to contain the background image's height in this small page, the larger size is actually smaller than the original. On the other hand, cover scales the background image to the smallest size it needs to be to include both the width and the height while maintaining its aspect ratio. Let's see how that works. Change it from contain to cover. What's happened now is that the background image has expanded to cover the background. This is the smallest that it needs to be to get in both the width and the height. And if I increase the width of the page, you see that the height also increases. So it sounds rather paradoxical, but the idea is that it needs to be that size to cover the background of the element. So the lesson from this is that when using the background size property on the body, you should normally use cover. With elements other than body, you should either use the actual size or you should use cover if the background image is smaller than the element itself. Otherwise, it won't fit both the width and the height of the element. Scaling background images with background size is very useful, but the contain and cover keywords can be confusing. I hope this video has helped demonstrate the difference. And one final point to remember, to support Firefox 3.6, you need to use the Moz vendor-specific prefix in addition to the standard background size property. In this video I'm going to show you how to create translucent borders using the background clip property. This property determines the area covered by an element's background. By default, browsers always draw the background behind an element's borders. As a result, a translucent border always picks up the element's own background and not the background of a parent element. So if you wanted this colourful background image to show through the borders of this content div, simply using alpha transparency on the border colour is not enough. To illustrate the problem, I've given the content div a solid white background. See here. Although I've used RGBA, the alpha transparency is set to 1. In other words, it's fully opaque. The border, on the other hand, has alpha transparency of 0.5. In other words, it's semi-transparent. So if I click on Live View, you'll see what the problem is. The dark red turns to pink, but none of the page's background image shows through. The answer to this problem is to use the background clip property. Dreamweaver's code hints suggest border box and padding box. Now, border box is the default way that browsers draw backgrounds, so that's of no use. The only one of interest is padding box. So let's just add that and refresh Live View, and you can see that the borders are now translucent. The reason for that is that the background colour is now being painted within the padding box. That can be confusing because the padding in this particular div is 15 pixels all around. So you might expect the transparency to go all around the padding as well, but the padding box is not where the text inside the div begins, but it's the point from which the padding is calculated. Put simply, it's the inside edge of the border, and that's exactly what you want. All modern browsers support the background clip property, but to keep Firefox 3.6 happy, you need to add the Moz vendor-specific prefix. So I'll just copy that and paste it and add the -Moz prefix, and Firefox 3.6 is kept happy. And to make it look a little bit nicer, we'll increase the transparency of the background colour, make it 0.8. So now you've got the background coming through both the div itself and through its borders. And that's all there is to the border clip property. It might not be the most stunning aspect of CSS, but it gives you another tool to refine your web page designs.